All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Joshua Rothes. I'm the publisher of Sublunary Editions. We're here to talk with Kristofor Minta, who is the author of the newly published A Perfectly Ruined Solitude. This is Kris's debut book of poetry. Pause for applause. Kris is, I feel like, Kris, in some ways, your publishing career is near synonymous with Sublunary, so I can kind of rattle it off a little bit. You are a poet and translator. You are the translator of let's see, pointing behind you, Rilke's The Voices in Other Poems, published by Sublunary Editions and Lamplight Editions in 2020. You have translated Jean Paul for Firmament. You have translated Robert Walser for Firmament. You are the translator of the forthcoming collected early poems of Robert Walser, which is due out this November. November, from me, who should know that. And you have also co-translated yes, which one are you pointing at there?
A shelter for bells.
Shelter for Bells, along with Herbert, who is on. And am I missing? I got the Vonder events.
No, I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's always To Die No More, which is the sort of the miscellany that Herbert and I put together, and was the beginning of my misadventures in the land of literature.
Yes. Well, we're very glad you entered this land of misfits and misadventures. So we're going to talk mostly about this today, which is your first book of poetry. Would you like to set the mood for us and read something from it?
Sure. Well, first, I just want to say that I'm something of a dubious poet. Like poet is almost synonymous to me with an insult, or it can be used as an epithet. It's one of the few, I think, positions as writer that can also be used as epithet. You don't point to someone and say like fucking essayist. I
do.
Oh, do you? All right, that's fine. But yeah, I tried to kill this off, man. Like I got into this in my teens, and then as an undergraduate, I studied with Philip Levine, and I had so here's the funny thing. He won the Pulitzer Prize while I was in his class, and we took him out for beer. And I just thought, as you do in a circumstance like that, you thought, I want this, I'm going to do this. And so, I tried to do that for a while and didn't get very far, and kind of abandoned it to do life instead. And then it just kind of wouldn't leave me alone. So I kept coming back to it, and so anyway, all through this book, I don't know how much of this is in the poems that I'm going to read today, but all through this book is this sort of distrust of poetry and the vocation of poet, and actually I've come to think that it's really healthy, because the people I know who are really in love with the identity of poet, I tend to find it hard to be around them. So anyway, yeah, just so you know, to set the stage, this is poetry from the work of like an ambivalent poet. Not ambivalent about my own work, not ambivalent about the concept of poetry, but just the practice. So I'll just start with a couple three here. The idea behind the book, because I think that a lot of poetry collections are sort of random poems that people have written over a certain period of time. That is to say, like, oh, I'm a poet. It's been 5 or 6 years since my last collection. What have I written, and what can I shape that into? And it ends up feeling, to me, relatively random. And I can't write that way. I write with projects in mind. And so these started sort of coming at me, and I realized that they were the beginning of some kind of a project. And so I went with it. And here's where it starts. The poem is called Conception. All your plans for the future, you're going to do things differently. Are you going to involve courage you never had before? You better find out where it will come from, this new courage. Don't wait until you need it to start looking. The Silent Brother. There is no brother. He is only in my head. Whoever reads this is my brother. You're looking at someone fostered, adopted, a one-time ward. A family took me in and gave me a sister, so I know what that's like. But I always wondered if, out in the world, there were a brother, a confidant, someone stitched with the same thread. I think I felt his shape. Maybe a half-brother, maybe my twin. Someone who could hear what I mean to say, not what I managed to speak. Maybe someone younger who might mistake me for wise. The more I thought about him, the more real he became, until he filled a book. Now he itches for freedom. He has become more real to me than most people. Someone asked me one time if I'd ever searched for a flesh and blood brother. You could probably Google it, but because the silent brother I already have is as near to me as my own heartbeat, I don't see why I would ever Google it. One second here. All right, so the brother is brought into existence, basically, and then starts the mentorship, the fatherhood. The relationship with the brother goes in many different directions. Sometimes the brother, the younger silent brother teaches the older, quite verbose brother. And so this first part here is sort of like the beginning of attempts to educate or impart something of value to the brother. The water is poison, brother, but don't worry. It doesn't kill you quick. You will have time to watch the clouds pass from over the country, to cover the city and pick up its glow. You will develop skills. You will learn to thread through crowds on sidewalks like a ghost. You will conceive of being a father and come very, very close. You will be convinced to discard your most vital parts first, like so many others. You will kill magic, only to see it seep in again at the edge of your vision. You will learn to walk right out of your skin, and even watch it lying there trampled by others without flinching. And you keep watering yourself this whole time because the doctor said to stay hydrated. It has plastic in it or something they can't filter out, something that feels at home in your liver. But don't worry, before you go, you will have plenty of time to know what is in front of the curtain and what behind, and maybe time to fall in love with the curtain itself. We can pause there for a moment.
So the book takes the form of a series of conversations that could also be construed as monologues. Certainly the veracity of the individuals involved is in question. But as these poems were starting to come to you, what form did they come in? Were you already sort of hearing these voices, these conversations? Was someone speaking the loudest at first, and at which point did other voices start to creep in?
Well, the thing is that I don't know whether it's training that I had as a fiction writer or what, but the person who's speaking in the poems is me, but it's not me. I mean, he's a fictional creation. And I think this happens a lot in poetry because we've been so schooled by confessional poetry to expect that whenever someone says I, they're literally speaking for themselves. And I mean, if we had to measure this up, this guy who's talking is mostly me, but he's not entirely me. And he says things that I can't stand behind sometimes, and things that I'm surprised sort of came out. But I think that I made a friend here in town. I came to this town to be in an MFA program, and it was a toxic experience. It was really terrible. But in the 3 or 4 years that I had contact with the people of this program, I really didn't make any friends, and I really thought this is a barren place. If it can't yield a single friend, and then I met a friend, someone who I bonded with instantly, but who was 20 years younger than me. And we ended up having just tons and tons of conversations. And I found myself wanting to give him advice, right? But this was someone who was, in his 20s, a fully formed individual for the most part, and I had to find myself like sort of resisting this urge to play some kind of mentor role where it wasn't asked for or wanted. So those kinds of urges started turning into poems. And I think that's probably like where that really came from. But of course, I'm a parent. And so some of this stuff is like, it's like, one day I should really tell my kid about this. And then I thought like, well, that, good advice to a kid doesn't necessarily make for a good poem. So then I thought like, how can I fuck this up and make it weird? But I think somehow, I think maybe something slipped in there, like the desire to offer wisdom to other people, if you have any share of it, is strong, I think, in everybody. But especially if you see somebody going through hard times, who doesn't want to try to offer advice? It's often not welcome. So trying to be aware of that, I try to funnel it into the book, which perhaps makes it extremely tedious. I don't know. You have to tell me. You're the one who decided to publish it.
Yeah, so clearly I don't think so. No, it fits kind of nicely in with your distrust of poetry as an institution. The second someone says, I have something to say that you should listen to and that might benefit you, it's a good time to maybe be skeptical and be a little bristly at that.
Yeah. Well, so the other thing that was going on was like the dissolution of a marriage for me. And so that had to sort of work its way in there as well. And about 2 years before I started work on these poems, my father died. So I had like a really interesting and not entirely pleasant sort of run of years there. And something had to come out of them, something positive. There's a poem in the book about that, about trying to take wounds and turn them into something, instead of just suffering the wounds. So anyway, maybe I'll do a couple more. Yeah, I mean, okay. I'll stop explaining so much and just read some more. How about that?
Sounds good.
Among the words serious poetry shuns are heart and love, soiled by the common touch, worn thin by use. The poet who employs them might as well have been stumbled upon sucking their thumb. If suspected of the crime of courting the masses, heart and love are the open and shut of the case. But hiding from these words does not exclude the catastrophe of them alive inside you, of you having to live inside them. Poetry would forgive us if we possessed reasonable synonyms, but poetry does not forgive us. We must bring back heart and love, brother. Describing us without them is like an account of day and night that fails to mention the sun, like explaining tsunami with no earthquake. I keep my heart empty to honor what used to be in it, what may fill it still in days to come. Watch me as I turn wine into water, a yellowish water. I'm laughable, but it doesn't cause me laughter. Comedy always comes at someone's expense. Okay, I'll start laughing too, like it costs nothing. I'm going to keep drinking, with or without you. On this day, I want to cut a notch in my bedpost because I have truly fucked myself. I want to cut a notch in myself so I can remember hereafter. Once the present loses its grip, all we have are notches. We eat future and shit past, brother. You may fool yourself that you're getting away with it, but a woman does not forgive you for being more dead each year, not when she needs you alive. Brother, I wrote you a letter I could not send. I filled it with atrocity, filled it with photos of family, Our cousin, the Khmer Rouge, his pile of trophies, human limbs heaped 4, 5 deep, darkening and greasy. Cousin Jiang King, blank-faced, beside 4 ruined men tied to chairs, rivals no more. Uncle Hutu with his machete, Uncle Peckerwood and friends arrayed around their tree of pendulous black fruit. That and more besides. The letter was endless. I think I had a point to make. I think I wanted you to look in their eyes and see the nothing they think we are. People with their ugly deeds are a challenge, brother. If the world is at all checked by even the largest of our evils, no known instrument is subtle enough to measure the effect. When someone we love is killed, then the world stops, but the world doesn't stop. What then? The Zen masters say, prepare for impermanence. They say you must proceed as if you are already dead. This is both monstrous and marvelous, as monstrous and marvelous as the world in which we live, which stops for nothing, the world which sadly must get on along down the road. It's another good stopping point.
So I'm curious about the there are, of course, as you've said, like this is you speaking or you but not you, but there seem to be other voices, other when I think of the more paternal voice coming in. Do you have any models for kind of or figures you were channeling at various places?
Well, I don't know that I'm actually going to read any of them. It's funny. This is referring to that email exchange, isn't it?
Oh, you gave it away that we talked. See, this
yeah, sorry.
Be spontaneous, Kris.
Sorry, letting them behind the curtain again. No, the I don't know that I'm actually going to read any of those, but there are a few that are almost sort of like. There's one particularly about penises that is that like veers wildly into like a sort of surreal explanation of what penises actually are. And things like that are obviously not meant to be good advice or wise counsel. But for my models there, I took sort of Polonius, from Hamlet. In his speech to Laertes, he says so many actually sort of wise things, but then he's so, he's so all over the map at other times. He's quite foolish. And so, in a way, he's sort of a model for my speaker because I talk about how being blind in one eye, which I am, might allow you only to be half wise. And so I think a good model for someone who's half wise would be Polonius. But also as a model, and probably much more interestingly, would be Calvin's father from the comic strip Calvin and Hobbes, because Calvin's dad is always ready to give his son Calvin a really bad explanation for like common phenomena. I do remember one where the sun is going down or something, and Calvin asks his father, why does the sky turn red when the sun goes down? And his father says, well, that's because the sun lands on the horizon and sets it on fire. And that's why we have deserts in the West. There's a punchline, to the strip, but I can't remember what the punchline is because I think when I first read it, I couldn't believe, the father was lying so horrendously to his son. And so of course I've tried to raise my child in exactly that way. Anyway, my kid's here and is laughing now. Anyway, so I just thought, let's try to channel a little bit of Calvin's dad mixed together with Polonius. I'm not going to read the penis poem though. It doesn't really fit in, with the whole thing. But there's what I wanted to stick with were like some of these poems of like, finding the world challenging and like how are you supposed to get through a world that's so challenging, and where do you find solace and where do you find wonder? I think the speaker veers between being completely enchanted by the world and feeling like he's been around for too long, right? Like it's almost time for him to go. And I think a lot of people veer between those two poles. And so, I mean, hopefully people that will resonate with people, but yeah, it's hard to look around at the world we're living in right now and not feel a little challenged by where you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to be doing and what the hell are you supposed to think about this particular thing. And the people who seem to have easy answers all seem to me to be completely untrustworthy. So I don't know, that's where I stand on that one. But maybe I should do a couple more. What do you think? Yeah. All right. I should also say that, pretty much none of these have titles. So if it seems like I'm pausing for a long time and then moving on to another one, that's because I'm just letting you know a poem has ended and I'm moving on to the next one. Maybe I'll start titling poems in the future so I don't have to run into this problem. The birds fly only at night now, brother, to hide from us. We won't see them again. One day soon, no one will see us again either. The animals all know we are to be avoided. I think we know it too. Strange to see the day skies vacant, to hear song from hidden sources. Behind the tree, from empty air, tracks in the snow when no beast is ever seen. No one could have imagined the end would be so beautiful, so minimal and swift. It turns out there won't be time for all the things we predicted. I think we thought it would be penniless 12-year-olds spreading their legs for tourists. No weight to the dollar at all. Dollars floating up into the air, on fire, singed, still glowing at the edges. We thought there would be time to convert our AR-15s to full auto. We would see it coming. The end would come with oil wells aflame, slow orange flickers against a boiling black ceiling, autonomous death from nowhere. There would be sweat. There would be sweat and what sticks to sweat and stinks, blood and what sticks to blood and festers. Astonishing to be so wrong. The world just took a half step away from us and tucked itself inside a pocket our greasy hand cannot enter. Beautiful. It's too beautiful. I can't bear it. You know, brother, a horse's eyes go wide when it's not sure, if it thinks you mean harm. When I was small, I couldn't conceive that I was enough to startle a horse. So I was wary of them. They frightened me. But slowly, we warmed up to each other. I fed them carrots from an open palm, because you don't get fingers in the way of those teeth, stained with grass, a sweet grassy smell on their breath. The velvet nose prickled here and there with whiskers, long branches of vein under the tight skin of the belly, the twitching skin, the twitching ears, completely uninterested in the news of flies. I only saw them on cool, wet mornings and in the orange and golden evenings. I don't know where they suffered out the day. So hot, you might go out to find everything expanded, twice its proper size. I hid. I think they hid too. I don't know how they didn't become wind when they ran. I don't know when the earth gave up its most magnificent mud to make them. I don't know where they slept, maybe in trees. We said we broke them, but I don't know one that was ever a slave. Did you hear that, brother? Did you hear that, heart? This is my news. I am not a fly. If you have a weakness, brother, you better learn to hide it. I showed up just as I am, and it was like a wind came into a quiet place. They all looked up. Everything I should have hidden, I pointed out to be helpful. They used those wavy daggers you sometimes see in old movies. They had thick, dark paint around their eyes, like silent movie villains. I survived, but look at these holes. I want to make something out of them, something made from nothing. My upgrade is in those empty spaces. Look at the night sky, bearded with comets. It too was once a wound.
So I have to resist my urge to always sort of conflate what is being written with the practice of writing itself, because I think that's a trap I fall into quite frequently, thinking like, gosh, who, you know, mentioned earlier this idea of the mentor and the sort of lying father figure, and like, gosh, that's all well and good with poetry. So if we're gonna get that, we might as well talk in straight terms. And so you obviously mentioned Philip Levine. Talk to me about the formative, like who are the guys that, I feel like we're talking like stand-up comics, like who are your guys?
Influences. So, well, I mean, I kind of have two poles, and then I have like, you know, I have a few people who I kind of can't fit between those two poles, and maybe I go to them even more often. But so the two poles are probably Levine and Philip Levine and W.S. Merwin. Merwin has this really cold voice, like at times sort of a prophetic voice. And I find that really attractive. And his book, The Lice, is a stunning sort of indictment of humanity, and like a real snapshot of outrage at environmental degradation, you know, in 1967 or 67. Yeah. I mean, he was ahead of the curve for understanding the sort of doom we were brewing up, you know, with pollution and extinction. And so yeah, but you know, Levine grew up in Detroit, you know, working the line in an auto factory, and understood the value of for intellectuals of being around you know, working class people, and understanding the dignity that belongs to all people, or at least should belong in any kind of just society. And so I'm torn between the fact that, I mean, dignity is an invention. Do you know, like someone has to grant you dignity, right? Like it's you can fight for your dignity, but you know, someone doesn't have to give it to you. You can. It's very frustrating. It's a very frustrating thing. So it's like I've grappled with this sort of Levinian, you know, demand for dignity and some form of you know, respect, trying to get that into my work, and then this sort of like cold, almost prophetic thing that Merwin does. But then, you know, I fell in love with poets like Mary Ruefle, who she's a genuine original. She just no one sounds like her, no one writes like her, no one thinks like her. I can tell you that in conversation she is delightfully kind of all over the map, but I feel there's a secret order behind virtually everything she says, even if it seems random. She's just a stunning person. And so her work, I think, points the way to like another successful avenue for poetry. And I don't know how successful I am at incorporating her influence, but she looms large in my thoughts. And then one other person I would like to mention, though people will have a hard time tracking down work by this guy, you know, Jaime Sabines is like a household name in Mexico, but he's not known very well in the States. And a good friend of mine, I was visiting his apartment one time, and I saw a Sabines book on the shelf, and I don't even know, it's not even that attractive a cover. I don't know why I pulled it down. And I opened it up and I saw that it was translated by Merwin. And I thought, well, Merwin has translated enough amazing stuff that this must also probably be good. And I started thumbing through it, and I couldn't believe how good it was. The book is called Pieces of Shadow, and it's just really fantastic. And a couple of years after I discovered this book, I found out that that Levine had also taken a turn at translating a selected works of Sabinus. So when I found out that here was this poet that was directly between these two poles that I'd staked out for myself, I kind of realized, like, this guy is my guy. And so his stuff is profane in a way that sort of English language poetry is not. When you hear me use terms like piss, shit, and fuck, like, that's probably all coming from Sabinus. This is something, it's just really weird. Like, if you want to use any kind of profanity in serious poetry in the States these days, I feel like, you're sort of indicating you don't wish to be taken seriously, or you're allying yourself with Black Sparrow poets and the Beats or something. Like something intentionally aside from the mainstream, which is really not what I'm aiming to do. But I do think that Sabinus deploys, he's downright insultingly profane sometimes, and somehow he makes it work. His work is filled with astonishing dignity. Anyway, good luck tracking it down. All of his stuff in English is out of print, pretty much. So, but yeah,
someone should do something about that.
Someone should do something about that. But I think that with translators like Levine and Merwin, it'd be like money to bring it back into print. Although my friend Victor is from Mexico, maybe he and I could work together, Josh, and put a new translation together for Sublunary. Just putting it out there.
Well, that's a nice transition into your work as a translator. So you've translated several different writers for Firmament. You've done the Rilke book with me. We're doing WALSER together as a nice volume this fall. Where did the journey into translation begin? I know for me, outside taking Spanish in high school and college, it was a desire to read things that I couldn't yet read. How did you get how did you pick up German, and was it initially with a literary bent, or something else?
No, not at all. Just just trying to fulfill the language requirement in college. And in fact, the truth is that like probably too many people, I tried to sign up for French 101, and the sections were all filled. And so as chance would have it, thanks to some classroom limitation back in the 90s, I was shunted into German. And then a few years later, I made a dear and lifelong friend, Herbert Föstl, and he's from Austria. And so it was something that we had kicked around for a long time, the idea that we might translate something together, because with my working knowledge of German and his being a native speaker, I thought we could probably knock something out. And so it sort of took off from there. And but I was always working away to try to sort of like increase my skills, increase my fluency, and so anyway, it's kind of a boring story, but yeah, I realized, I said to you in an email too, that I'm often motivated. This is probably a really bad way to be motivated, but I'm often motivated by seeing things that I don't like, things that really make me angry, and I react against them. And my career in translation really started with these Rilke translations, and I didn't get started on them just because I thought they were great poems and that I needed to have my own versions. I got started on them because I found that the most popular translator of Rilke, Stephen Mitchell, was playing funny games with his translations. Reading the German alongside the Mitchell translations, I saw how many liberties he had taken, and I thought of all the people who must be reading those translations thinking that they were experiencing what Rilke wrote, when in fact sometimes they were experiencing almost entirely just what Mitchell wrote. That made me angry. And so I just thought, like, how would this be done right? Like, how would I do this if I was going to do it? And it turned out to be really enjoyable, actually. And so, yeah, I mean, that was 2011. I presented the Rilke poems at the Wave Poetry Festival at the University of Washington. Wave Books used to put on this wonderful festival every year at UW, and I was lucky enough to get invited to present them there, and sort of sitting in front of the audience explaining why I thought, I deserved attention, whereas like the person who was at the top of the game, was something of a charlatan. I kind of thought, like, yeah, just more people need to hear this, but also we need more honesty in translation. We need to have, like, accurate but beautiful versions of things. And I thought, I think maybe I can do that. So yeah, that's kind of where we are with that. The WALSER, I got into for exactly the reason that you mentioned, which is that when I started on those translations in 2018, virtually none of his poetry was in English. And I realized, like, wow, if I'm going to read this stuff, I'm going to have to sort of translate it myself, because I'm not fluent enough to just sit and read German for long stretches at a time. But I was really shocked and pleased to find that the early poems of WALSER, I basically could read without a dictionary. Like, the German is not particularly difficult. He gets more difficult later on. But he clearly was limiting his vocabulary, early on. And I think he wanted to produce a kind of simplicity in the poems. And I also found that if anybody here is familiar with WALSER, I think that most English-speaking people, the way that he's sort of been introduced, maybe doesn't give the full picture. Someone who is familiar with his whole body of work, and who was a German speaker, has a slightly different WALSER. He's kind of been sold to an English language audience as an ironist. And there's great argument as to how much of an ironist he is. I don't particularly care for people who make their career out of irony. And so I always kind of held him at arm's length. But his early poems are in earnest. Basically the first 5 years of his writing career, his publishing career, he wrote these really wonderful and beautiful poems, but that were in earnest. And then he went in 1904 to Berlin, where his brother had already made a success for himself designing stage sets for drama productions. And his brother was an artist. And his brother introduced him to the literati, of Berlin. And Robert Walser was well liked. He made lots of inroads as far as, like, getting published himself, but it also changed him. I don't want to say that he became cosmopolitan. He was always a very eccentric person. He did drop out of literary society to join a school for butlers, and everyone thought he was mad, and possibly he was, at least for a moment, while he joined the butler school. And he got a novel out of that. But I just, again, like, the tone of this, the tone just shifts away from any kind of earnestness to a kind of, for me, off-putting irony. And some people find it really funny. And the thing is that I don't know that Walser ever intended his ironies to be funny. It's an interesting thing. I don't know how mentally ill he actually was. And I think it's just a matter of speculation for anyone at this point in time. But that stance that he adopts after moving to Berlin is far less attractive to me than when he's speaking openly. That said, the poem that I'm prepared to read right now is actually from the period after that, and will be the latest poem in the collection. In the collection that you're publishing, everything is published prior to World War I. Without going into a big long thing, World War I, of course, was like a tremendous rupture for all European literature. I mean, it was a tremendous rupture for Europe, but literature prior to World War I had a hard time making a comeback stylistically, or like, you know, even just the mentality of the literature was entirely changed, because people struggled to say things that felt adequate to the, you know, to the tragedy and atrocity of the war. And thus was born modernism, expressionism, Dadaism, surrealism. Like, all of these things are attempts to cope with the psychic rupture that the war produced. And so, you know, you have Walser with his earnestness and then his irony. And there's a period there during the war, obviously, like probably where publishing was suspended because of, you know, the need for materials for the war and all that sort of stuff. So Walser comes back in, you know, 1919 to poetry, and he hasn't really written poetry in a very long time. He's only written prose. And so it's interesting to me to see what he tries to do with poetry. And the first thing we see him do is this poem called Spring, and that's what I'm going to read now. And to be honest with you, it's I find that it's a departure from irony. He's I think he wants not to make amends. He's Swiss, even though he's a German speaker. He's Swiss. He wasn't really, you know, his country wasn't involved in the war. But I think he wants to try to use poetry to make European peoples friends again. I know that sounds really strange, but it feels so earnest to me. That must have been a feeling that a lot of people had. They did call it the War of Cousins, after all. You know, and so I enjoy his earnestness. So I'm gonna give you an earnest poem after I take a drink of wine. All right. So again, this is called Spring. It probably suits everyone that it's warm again, and that the windows are open and spring breezes blow through the room. Presumably, no one finds it disagreeable that forests green again, and the meadows are full of grass, and birds sing in the trees, and the earth brings forth violets. So many hundreds of thousands of green leaves. Spring is a field marshal, and no one minds when it conquers the world. It trails a triumphant sea of flowers through all lands. Provinces are white, as though awaiting the arrival of a princess. Oh, everything is so delicate, far too fragile to last. That spring is but brief, what stale stuff I spout. Yes, everyone knows. Too easy, child's play. Is it even possible? People ask themselves and look on one another with smiles. One even weeps for joy. It's difficult to see all that splendor and not be moved. Spring has often visited before, yet it's new each time and always in youth. The old walks with the young, husband with wife, the little with the large, and all become brothers, nations with nations. The lover steals to his beloved. He sings. Only those who truly love succeed in song, kissing and dreaming. Not far off, life's sobriety stands by a wall, lurking ominously. Those who pass by are obliged to tremble. So that's how we're going to, hang on, I'm going to give you an earnest poem after I have a drink of wine. Thanks. Good quote.
I'll have that on a t-shirt before AWP.
Nice. I appreciate that.
There is something in what you said. I think maybe the old anecdote about Kafka, about Max Brod saying that he would walk around reading bits of the trial, laughing out loud, like, I think has maybe become our default, like when one encounters something that's maybe a little dark, a little ironic, especially German speaking early 20th century. We just say, oh, they must have meant to be funny. But I must admit, I was mostly familiar with that Walser, and this collection of poems is very exciting. And I think
it's also it's also nervous. I mean, this is the thing,
Yeah.
right? Like the Rilke poems that I translated are all also from this period leading up to the war. I would say that I mean, without being a complete student of history here, from about 1907 to 1914, with the outbreak of the war, there's like if you read literature from that period, there's a lot of, it's like the period before World War II. There was something in the air. People knew something bad was possibly coming. And so it makes a lot of the writing nervous and edgy. And I feel that we live in pretty nervous and edgy times. And so, not that I'm hoping for another terrible conflagration, but I do feel like, maybe less so with Trump out of office, not to make any political comments, but like, it feels like, we do live in a time where a little nudge might take us to a bad place. And I think those are the kinds of things that Rilke was feeling and that Walser was feeling in those years running up to, and many others, in those years leading up to World War I. So the things that they have to say and the emotions they have to express, I think, have a lot of relevance for our particular moment.
And there's something about at least the projects you've chosen as a translator and the work I've read of yours as a poet, there does seem to be there's a continuity there. There's a continuity to your body of work. There's a continuity, I think, and this may sometimes I feel like this may be an insult to a translator, but like there's a continuity to the voice. Like I'm not sure if I could blindly pick out a Kris Minta translation. But when I read your poetry, having read your translations first, I thought like, oh, this makes sense. This feels it feels like there's some poetic sensibility here. Like the poems you've translated that I've read have been earnest, but they've been relatively unadorned. You've shorn some of the adornments away that Stephen Mitchell or Robert Bly have put into those poems. I think we had a long conversation about Bly just sort of inventing nouns that weren't even there. Not even just adjectives or phrasings, but nouns. But what do you see as the relationship between your practice as a translator, not only the practice of translating, but the picking of things that you want to work on? Is there anything unified other than me throwing Jean Paul at you?
Well, yeah, I mean, one has a sensibility and it develops over a long time. I don't know how much to say about that, just that I have my concerns. And when I see those concerns reflected, in the work of someone else, whether they're from 100 years ago or 200 years ago or from yesterday, it gets my attention. And so that draws me to it and makes me want to know more about it, especially if it's in German, because then I can probably read the original and see all the things that are missing in any currently existing English translations. You can't get everything. There's just so much that won't come over. And I'm sure it's the same for people who want to take English into German. But I think that those tiny regrets are things that you have to deal with. Herbert and I are working on a new batch of Hans-Jürgen von der Winze. He's a bright guy, and so am I. And we sit there haggling back and forth, trying to get nuance and meaning that's clearly present for the German speaker into English. And sometimes it just is really stubborn. It won't come. I mean, possibly you could do it in an incredibly inelegant way. But at the end of the day, if what Winze wrote is somehow elegant, you can't be a barbarian. You have to come up with something that matches the tone and the sensibility. So yeah, anyway, I have my own I obviously have my own idea of what is important to represent in art, and I've tried to put it in this voice, and I've tried to choose work that sort of reflects those concerns and that sort of sensibility. That said, another way to interpret it is just that I have only, like, I'm a radio tuned to only one station. It would be nice, I think, to attempt other voices, but it has to feel honest to me. I think, you know what I mean? Like I'm teaching a class, and we're reading The Overstory by Richard Powers, if anyone has read that book. And Powers is really masterful at attempting all of these different voices. And there's a kind of epic quality, I feel, to an author who can find these different voices, often people from different cultures, and different genders or whatever, and he can really sell them, and not in a cheap way. You really have to go along with him. He really moves out of his own voice with authority. So I really respect that kind of thing, and suspect that it's not possible for me. Whereas if somebody reads my stuff and reads my translations and really likes that voice and that sensibility, well, thank goodness, you're my crowd. But also I'm aware of the limitations. There are extraordinary talents out there that can do something that's very, very different from what I do. So anyway, I feel like it's important to sort of know where you fall in the scheme of things. And I'm no Richard Powers, but then again, do I want to be?
Well, it is 1 till the top of the hour. I don't think we have time for questions or anything, but Kris, do you want to take us out with one more? And I'll precede that by saying thank you all for attending. This was a lot of fun. It's kind of a weird time, but it's a time that allowed a lot of people to join. So I was happy to see people from the West Coast to the UK join. So thank you all for being here.
Sure. Let's see. What would make a good one here? So toward the end of the book, as I mentioned at the very beginning, the brother becomes more and more real. And it also seems like maybe there are a couple of things going on, like maybe the brother has fulfilled his purpose. Do you know what I mean? So maybe the courage that's been sought has been found. But also maybe the brother is just sick of listening to this speaker prattle on and on. And so he disappears. And for several poems, the speaker is like sort of wondering where he went and what could be going on, and trying to cajole him back, trying to get him back, and eventually realizes that he has to let him go. So the last 2 poems, I'm not going to read the very last one because I really choke up every time I read it. It's really quite pathetic. But I'll read you the next to last poem. You are my soul's child, always leaving, growing beyond control. My mother said the same of me. She said, I only see you once a year now. Soon it won't even be that. Of all the ways to touch the world, brother, you are the most complete, a star that catches up to its own light. Hear my blessing. Nothing will be a prison for you, not even your own walls. In the dark morning, in the falling damps, you walk free. And if you pass a tree, the tree dreams your dreams. If you walk free, anything could happen next, forever.
Kris, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We'll have the recording up on YouTube sometime in the next day or two. So if you missed part of it or just want to relive it, you'll be able to.
Thanks for being here, everybody.